and we're gonna do the 2023 book tag. As someone who has been consuming YouTube content for the last 10 years plus, I have seen my share of tags. But today, I finally have got the courage and I am doing my own. So we're gonna be talking about a bunch of different books in 2023. Think of these as the superlatives, if you will. 2023, I actually didn't buy a lot of books, so I don't have a lot of these physical. I'm just gonna be putting them up on the screen. As I talk about them, I have a few physical in a stack here, but honestly, my Kindle just really came in clutch this year. I read a lot of books on my Kindle for free, and I read a few audiobooks, not a lot of physicals. So let's jump right into it. I think there's like 20 questions or so. So let's get started. Okay, we're starting it off strong, and I'm so sorry. I know this gives very pick-me energy, and I do not intend it to be that way. I've talked about this book many times, but the first question is the most disappointing read of the year, and I'm sorry, but it has to be Fourth Wing, hands down. This was, I think Overhyped is another question. Yeah, a book that was overhyped. This could also fall into that category, but honestly, with the amount of anticipation that this book had, it was absolutely the most disappointing. I can't believe that it's so highly rated. I won't get into a whole spiel, but for me, I was really expecting it to be at a higher level due to all the acclaim that it was getting. And honestly, it just didn't do it for me. I just thought that I read a lot of other better fantasy books. I found the characters to be very trope heavy, which I understand a lot of fantasy and fantasy romance these days is essentially a giant trope. For me, the writing in this is really atrocious. I'm sorry. The concept, while cool and it could have been a lot better, just didn't do it for me. And it was something that I feel like I was missing out on because everyone else loved it so much. And I didn't get that. I was really disappointed after reading it. I've never thought about it again other than how I don't understand the hype that it gets. That's about the only time that I think about Fourth Wing. So that's my most disappointing read for the year. Brutal honesty. That's just the way it is. Okay, my Underdog book of the year. I don't exactly know what this is supposed to mean, but I'm assuming just something that's not that popular. For me, an Underdog is basically a romance book because I do not enjoy typical rom-com contemporary romances. However, my Underdog for the year is A Cat Cafe Christmas. I just read this like last week and I loved it. I ate it up. It was really cute, really fun, few like sweet, tender moments. There were definitely a few cringe moments that I get with almost every single contemporary romance that I read. Just like TikTok pop culture references, I really don't enjoy when I'm reading a book. However, this just worked for me. I thought it was really cute. It's basically what it sounds like. A girl runs a cat cafe and she bumps into a guy who is not an animal person. You know, they get together. It's really cute. I really recommend it. A book that was overhyped. So we already kind of touched on this. Fourth Wing, absolutely, but I'm gonna give a second one just because I feel like that's a little easy just to say Fourth Wing for every category. For me, a book that was overhyped was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I just didn't enjoy it that much. I heard a lot about it. I'm not saying it was a level of Fourth Wing hype, but I saw it, at least personally, on my feed a lot. So I had high expectations for it and it just didn't deliver for me. But I know a lot of people that liked it. I read it in my book club. Some people really liked it. It didn't quite hit for me. Favorite couple of the year. This was a tough choice. And basically it's between two couples, both from the same author in the same universe. So my answer is going to be Lilith and Vale from Six Scorched Roses, which is the Crown of Nyaxia universe, which is the Serpent of Wings at Night universe. This is a novella. It's a standalone. I believe it's put as like 1.5, you know, so it's in between the two of the main books. And that's how I read it. I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night first. Then I read this on Kindle. I read this in one sitting, in a day. It was so good. The romance, the chemistry was all there. The spice was there. The banter was there. I felt their chemistry. Jesus Christ. Okay, where was I? Lilith and Vale from Six Scorched Roses. I still think about these characters because the chemistry was just so there that I really was rooting for them. I really enjoyed both of them separately and together. This did not read like a novella in the best way. I wanted more. I wanted this to be 300, 400 pages. It was one of the shortest books I've read this year. This author packed so much punch in those 100 and some pages. It did not feel rushed. The characters felt fleshed out. They felt complete. I understood their emotions, their desires, their struggles. It was just done really well. And the chemistry between those two was just top tier. So they're definitely my favorite couple. A common theme as well for me this year is vampires. I loved every vampire male character that I read this year, and Vale was no exception. He is hot. That's all I gotta say. Along the same lines, my favorite actual characters of the year were the main characters, Rain and Aurea from The Serpent and the Wings of Night. I found their banter and their chemistry also to be done really well. And so obviously I just really enjoyed Carissa Broadbent's characters because those are definitely my two favorites. I think about both of these books a lot. I think about these characters a lot. Now I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't remember a ton of specifics about these two, but Rain to me felt like the main character, the male main character that I love. He's protective and strong and funny. Likes when his love interest is a little bit mean to him. I love that. That does it for me. Aurea was badass in her own right. I love that she didn't want to love him, but she ended up doing it anyway. I found her to be believable and not so full of the woe is me trope that you often see in these kind of fantasy romance books. I just thought they were both done really well, and I loved every single scene that I had them together, and then when they were apart, all I wanted was for them to get back together. So I think that says a lot. A book that surprised you was, I have two for this, more than two, but the first is the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. This surprised me because I don't, again, really do contemporary romance. And this is I would say this is contemporary romance. There's quite a large age gap relationship in this and some kind of more controversial like dynamic along the lines of like a Penelope Douglas, which I have never read, so don't quote me on that, but I often see them kind of put together. Kind of a dark, very smutty romance. With a bit of problematic things in there. I'm not gonna even lie. To me, it worked. I really enjoyed these books. I read the whole series, all three, and I blew through them. That's not to say that I agree with how everything was handled or how a lot of the relationships in this book went, but it was fast-paced, it was sexy, it was fun. I expected to really cringe and roll my eyes at it. There was eye rolling for sure, but overall it surprised me, and like I said, I blew through them and I really liked them. So I would say that series, Ravenhood, overall was a big surprise for me. Also, Writers and Lovers. I really had no expectations going into this. I just was like, okay, this is a standalone fiction that I'm just gonna give a try. Obviously it's about writers and lovers, two things that I relate to and sounds very interesting to me. This really surprised me. I just found it to be really well done, really touching, really hit home for me on a lot of points. And like I said, I saw this on YouTube quite a bit a few years ago. Nothing really since, so I didn't know what to expect. And this was one of my favorite books of the year. So absolutely loved this and highly recommend it. I just touched on this when talking about Carissa Broadbent, but she's absolutely my new favorite author that I discovered this year. I wanted to say Blake Crouch as well, but I realized that I read Dark Matter in 2022. That's an honorable mention. Blake Crouch is also another new-ish to me author that I've discovered I really love. But Carissa Broadbent, like I said, I think her fantasies are done really well. Six Scorched Roses alone, that novella solidified this for me. I just think that in this kind of young adult fantasy romance, I don't know if this is young adult specifically, The Serpent of Wings and Night. I'm gonna assume it is. They're young adults. it can be so cringe. It can be so, the writing can really leave a lot to be desired in a lot of these fantasy romance books. And that's fine because a lot of times people aren't reading it for that, but something like Fourth Wing where the writing is just not good, it's not worth it to me to be reading it because there's just better books I could be reading. I don't want to be pretentious, but my level of expectations is just a bit higher after you read a lot of books. Your expectations are risen, you know what I mean? So for me, I found these fantasy romances to just be overall well done. Probably my favorite fantasy romance series since ACOTAR, and just overall characters, world building, plot, writing style. I really enjoy it all, and I will be reading more from Carissa Broadbent in 2024. No doubt about it. My happiest read of the year, this was kind of hard for me because I am an emo at heart. I don't really read happy books. I don't read self-help. I don't read development. I don't read inspiring memoirs. I really don't do that. I tend to gravitate more towards fantasy and kind of tragic, gothic, dark stories and books in general. But my happiest read for sure for this year was Legends and Lattes. This is just like a warm mug of tea or coffee, and it really did just put a smile on my face. I really enjoyed it. There are low stakes, but there's enough stakes where it's interesting. It's not just, you know, rainbows and butterflies the whole time, but just overall, it was cozy. It was cute. It made me happy. There was no real tragedy. They were definitely my happiest read of the year. Most frustrating read in 2023. There were a few that I thought about for this, but honestly, when it came down to it, I don't really read a lot of things that frustrate me like that because I don't know, I just brush it off as like, okay, this wasn't for me or this writing was not great. Frustrating is not an emotion I feel very often when reading books, but The Atlas Paradox I read in the very beginning of this year, and that was frustrating to read because the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox, in my opinion, have so much potential that it just does not live up to. It just can't come around for me. The plot is so all over the place, and there's so much depth to these characters that could be there that you really, in my opinion, do not get because it's just not there in the books. Like, I found it to be frustrating while reading it and after I was done because I really had no desire to read the last book. I think this is a trilogy, and I don't believe it's out yet, but it was frustrating enough where I was like, okay, I'm done with this. And honestly, I'm done with Olivia Blake. Like, I don't enjoy her writing style. Haven't enjoyed either of those books. I thought they were very frustrating. And so if I had to pick one, sorry, it'd be Atlas Paradox. The next question was the best adaptation of the year. To be quite honest with you, I didn't read a single adaptation. That's not true. I haven't read an adaptation that I've also watched the book or movie. So I think that was last year that I reread Lord of the Rings. Time is so weird because I could have sworn to you that I read The Fellowship and Two Towers this year. I would have put money on it that I did that, and apparently I didn't. A Discovery of Witches I read this year, which has an adaptation, but I did not watch the adaptation. I will say my favorite book adaptation is Lord of the Rings, and notable mention to Normal People, which I read in 2020. That Hulu adaptation is absolutely insanely good. Go watch the Hulu Normal People miniseries. I think about, you want to answer to a question that they didn't ask? A show adaptation from a book that I think about every day of my fucking life is Normal People. Okay, that's not part of this tag, so we're just gonna move on, but go watch Normal People on Hulu. The longest book that I read this year, begrudgingly, Jesus, this was, you know when those books are so long and you're just like, this, sometimes they fly by, sometimes they're a slog. This was the longest book I read this year, and my God, did I want it to end. I am a Sarah J. Maas girly just like the rest of us, okay? I love her to death. Not this though. Crescent City's not my favorite. This was definitely the longest. It felt like the longest. It went on forever. I think it took me 2 months to finish this book. It's 800 plus pages. My sister borrowed it and read it too. She also had a hard time getting through it. So that's all I'll say about this. The longest book of the year. Next Crescent City book will probably be the longest book that I read next year. Like, let's just be real. The shortest book I read this year, already talked about it, already harped on it, how much I love it, was Six Scorched Roses. Also notable mentions, another novella that I read was How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories, which is the, obviously, Elfhame. What is the trilogy? It's something Elfhame world. The Cruel Prince universe. I read the novella from that as well by Holly Black. Also really enjoyed that one, actually. Don't sleep on novellas. I even have another novella on this list later that I really loved. I think that they are quite underrated sometimes. I like them a lot. Favorite cover of the year. This was tough because I honestly didn't read a ton of physical books, like I said, so I had to go through my Goodreads, and no covers really stood out to me, but I have to go with Babel if I had to choose one, because I just think it's very classically beautiful. I think this will be a classic in the future. So I do really enjoy the cover of Babel. That's also the answer to my next question on this list, is a book that I haven't stopped thinking about is Babel. I think about Babel every other day. It's definitely one of the best books that I've read this year, and I think about it constantly. If that's any indication for you to read it, seriously read Babel. It's incredible. It's very well done. It's very thought-provoking. It is quite long. That's another very long book that I read, but I read that so much more quickly than like House of Sky and Breath. It's just, Babel is top tier. Haven't stopped thinking about it. It's not even that I think about the plot of the book so much, is just how I think about how that was probably my favorite reading experience of the year, because while I was reading Babel, I just felt like this is peak reading. Like, this is literature, babes. This is literature. I still think about it. I also still think about Six Scorched Roses quite a bit. I think about that novella a lot as well. The cringiest book I read this year. If you watched my last video, I used this exact adjective to describe My Best Friend's Exorcism, which I read Halloween-ish time this year. Hands down cringiest book that I read this year. One of the cringiest books I've ever read. Grady Hendrix is just not for me. Horror in general, I don't even know what that subgenre of horror is. That kind of like 80s Stranger Things horror subgenre. Not my thing. I find it very cringe. Unpopular book I loved. Okay, I have kind of two for this. Another novella, like I said. I reread the entire ACOTAR series this year, and it reminded me how much I love A Court of Frost and Starlight. I know this is a lot of people's least favorite in the series. They say don't even read it. They're just like, it's pointless. It's just favorite Christmas shopping. That sounds like a great time to me. I love reading about the mundane things that characters do. Like sitting around and reading books, or going Christmas shopping, or like mulling over their shopping lists. Like, I love that personally. So I wouldn't say this is like super unpopular, but you know, in the scheme of like book talk and whatnot, I think it kind of is. And I really love this one. The other kind of unpopular, I'm saying unpopular just in the sense that I don't hear a lot about it. And that's The Discovery of Witches, which I've been kind of raving about for the last 2 months-ish, I feel like, on socials and here on YouTube, because I just love this so much and I don't see people reading it. And I don't know why. I mean, it came out about 10 years ago, I want to say. So I'm sure that timeliness has something to do with it, but I also see quite divisive reviews on this. A lot of people give this like 1 and 2 stars, so I'm kind of taking that as an unpopular as well. I think this is great. That might be an unpopular opinion. So the next is the highest and lowest rated books you read this year, Goodreads ratings. And do I agree? Shocker Fourth Wing is the highest rated book that I read this year out of 44 books I've read so far. It's the highest with I think a 4.6 something, which is just absurd to me. I won't continue to harp on that, but no, I don't agree. I don't think it should be rated that high in general, but for it to be the highest rated book of all the books I've read, and just like one of the highest rated books in recent times at all, is just mind-blowing to me. So no, I don't agree with that. The lowest rating of a book that I read this year was Flux, which has a 3.4. I mean, I don't really read anything like below a 3.5 to be fair. So I would kind of agree with that. I read Flux. I didn't really love it. I think I gave it a 3. So I would agree with that rating, but I don't think that it means it's bad by any means. I didn't read anything like particularly atrocious this year, so. Favorite quotes. Okay. I'm not someone who annotates really. However, I am going to try and do that soon when I reread Throne of Glass. I think it's gonna be my first like annotation, so I can actually kind of mark quotes and things like that. But I don't as it stands. And when I thought about my favorite quotes, Writers and Lovers really stood out. So I'm just gonna read a couple quotes from Writers and Lovers that I think if you are a woman, especially a woman maybe in like your 20s or 30s, you will probably relate to this. Okay, here's a quote just like about being a woman. I squat there and think about how you get trained early on as a woman to perceive how others are perceiving you at the great expense of what you yourself are feeling about them. Sometimes you mix the two up in a terrible tangle that's hard to unravel. This is just like a good indicator of what Writers and Lovers is like. The Bell Jar also is an honorable mention for quotes about being a woman that are quite poignant and breathtaking, but I chose Writers and Lovers for this quote in particular. Nearly every guy I've ever dated believed they should already be famous, believed that greatness was their destiny, and they were already behind schedule. An early moment of intimacy often involved a confession of this sort. A childhood vision, teacher's prophecy, a genius IQ. At first, with my boyfriend in college, I believed it too. Later, I thought I was just choosing delusional men. Now I understand it's how boys are raised to think, how they are lured into adulthood. I've met ambitious women, driven women, but no woman has ever told me that greatness was her destiny. I just think it's great. I had a lot of moments in this where I was just like, damn, that writing is so good. It's strange to not be the youngest kind of adult anymore. That hit. As the eldest daughter and the oldest of the grandchildren in my family, it's very strange to me to not be like the kid adult anymore. I am a full-blown adult. Those are some of my favorite quotes. The book with the most unique concept, I'm gonna give that to Flux, with a honorable mention to Recursion by Blake Crouch. They're both basically kind of sci-fi time traveling, but Flux had the added layer of 3 different perspectives. I won't say that the time traveling aspect was done well, but it was unique. So I'll give it that. Book you read that you would reread. I'm again gonna say the Serpent and Wings of Night series. I would reread that in a heartbeat. It's not a priority right now, but I would reread that. I will not reread Crescent City. I'm sorry, I won't do that. I just won't. I would reread Babel. I would reread Legends and Lattes. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I would also reread. But I would say Serpent and the Wings of Night would be my top. Okay, reading goal, reflection, and 2024 reading goal. I think I'm gonna do a separate video on this, so I'm just gonna briefly chat about this. Obviously, I wanna read more. I'm only at 44 books of my 55 goal. There's no way in hell I'm making that, and that's fine. I'm not someone who is like really discouraged by not meeting a goal. I just find goals to be something nice to aspire to, and I just don't really care if I don't meet it. Like, the fact that I'm like, I read 40 plus books this year is, so it doesn't really bother me to not meet goals. You could say that I'm not a very ambitious, goal-oriented person. It doesn't bother me. I would obviously like to read 50 books next year, because the last 3 years that I've been really reading more heavily again as an adult, that's about been my goal, and I haven't met it yet. So I would just like to read a little bit more and hit that 50 books a year. I might beat it by the end of this year. I have what, 2-3 weeks left, It's possible, but probably not. That's all I'll say on that for 2024. After 2023 reading, what are you prioritizing in 2024? So as far as 2024, there's a few fantasy series that I want to read. I am also going to do another video on that, so I'm not going to say that. But I would also like to read more classics next year. I don't think I read a single classic this year other than The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I have a whole shelf that is dedicated to classics. I do quite enjoy them, but it can be hard like to get into, right? So I think I'd like to read The Picture of Dorian Gray next year. I'm looking at my classics shelf. Donna Tartt, The Goldfinch, I would really like to get to. I'd like to read Rebecca. So I'd like to just sprinkle in a few more classics next year because I do quite enjoy them. I might read Wuthering Heights this winter, so we'll see. That wraps up this book tag. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope that if you love Christmas as much as I do, that you have a wonderful Christmas. If you don't celebrate, I hope that your winter season is cozy, healthy, happy. I hope you read some good books, and I'm excited to continue making content in 2024. I guess I could put that in my 2024 goals. I would like to get on a consistent once-a-week schedule with YouTube, with book content, because it's been really fun. Even just starting this channel in general was a goal that I've had for a really long time. So even just doing that and starting it and being here means a lot to me. So happy holidays, cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.